Hey, thanks for stopping by Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure that you're checking out the bell icon that's down there and you're hitting that so that you're getting notifications for my content when it comes out. Check out the website. Going to be publishing essays there pretty soon. And when you subscribe and I get a few subscribers, there's going to be at least a monthly newsletter. Lots of things going on for TC and lots of stuff going on for Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. Some of it right now very foundational. So as things progress, we're going to be talking about that more. So today is Mother's Day. As this publishes, as this drops, whatever we're calling it in the tech world today, it is May 9th of 2021. And so I wanted to make a video honoring mothers and women. And in particular, I want to, because I never do this, so I want to do this today. I want to dedicate this video to 3 very important mothers in my life. One, I want to dedicate it to my daughter, who in her own right is already becoming a phenomenal mother. She was well raised and well trained, and she is making great advances in her parenting skills even now. And I just want her to know how much I appreciate the fact that she takes very good care of her little girl. And so that's the first dedication. The second dedication is to my wife, who was and continues to be a phenomenal mother. She took the task of home educating our children to heart. And when she started from day one, our kids spent not a single day in government indoctrination centers. And through all the pitfalls and through all the highs and all the lows, she did a phenomenal job, oftentimes doing the work of 3 to 4 people around her home and with the kids, not only raising them and feeding them and clothing them, but educating them. And the places where they are successful today, the places where they are good and decent human beings today, is because of her influence and the way that she raised them and taught them. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank my mother, especially for this last year that I've been doing this channel and doing commentary. She has offered critiques, she's offered feedback, she's offered support. And in the truest sense of the word, she has been a fan, in that she hasn't just blindly and blithely gone along and given a big yes and amen to every single thing that I've said. She's pushed back on me quite hard at times. And that's valuable, especially in our society and our culture today, where the only way you can be a friend or a loved one or a supporter is if you acquiesce to everything that I want and acknowledge that everything that I say and do is absolutely perfect and correct all the time. And people who are reasonable and intellectual and logical understand that true friendship, true love, says hard things and pushes back when they think it's necessary. And that's what this last year, especially for my mother, has been. And those places where I do well, where I speak well, where I behave well, where I take strong stands, and oftentimes at great risk to myself, part and parcel, a lot of that is due to how I was raised, both by my mother and my father. And while we may not always agree on everything, we don't always see everything exactly the way we would want the other one to see it. Those places where I do well are because of the kind of parents I had, especially my mom. She is a strong woman. She continues to be a strong woman. She has always been a strong woman. She has survived much, and she has battled much, and she has fought much in her life. She has never been the product of easiness and silver spoons, if you will. What she has, she's fought for, and that means even her family. So What's the topic of this video today? Obviously, since it's Mother's Day, I'm going to talk about women and mothers, and I am going to go through a brief list of some of the influential women from the American War for Independence. I know you're all used to saying the American Revolution. I have reasons for not referring to it as a revolution. Mom, I'm drinking chicken broth. Fighting me a bit of a cold. No, it's not the coof. So, what's my reasoning for talking about moms on Mother's Day? Well, gee, I don't know, especially from the guy who has critiqued the heck out of man-made holidays like Mother's Day and Father's Day. And all of my the women that I have mentioned in this video know my stance on churches that make a huge focus on Mother's Day, where they hand out flowers and they praise moms and they sing songs about moms on Mother's Day. And the pastor often will preach a sermon about how wonderful moms are and how dads need to do more and they're not doing enough and they need to take better care of their wives so that they can have a day off. And then dad is directed, ordered, if you will, to make sure he takes mom out for a nice dinner or makes her a nice dinner at home and that the kids help. And then on Father's Day, dads get nothing at church. And the pastor preaches a sermon about how dads need to do more and they're not doing enough, and then dad turns around oftentimes and ends up taking the entire family out to dinner on his dime for Father's Day or grilling because that's what everybody wants. And that's mostly tongue in cheek, but of course, with every single joke or wry sense of humor, there's always a little thread of truth in all of that. So before I say too much, which my mom would tell you I am notorious for doing, and she could oft be heard saying during my life sometimes, Todd, it's just better to be quiet than to say too much, which I think she got from the Bible somewhere. It says, where there is much word, there is speaking, there is much sin. It's true. And at some point, the more I talk, the more the women in my life tune me out. So, rightly so. So, ladies, this is for you. So, who are some, key female figures, mother figures, wife figures from the Revolutionary War, from the American War for Independence? Well, believe it or not, the Journal of the American Revolution, didn't look into them too much. I'm assuming it's a pretty solid journal. They actually list one as Mary Ball Washington, who, of course, was the mother of our first president, our founding father, George Washington. So what they say about Mary is that she had a fundamentally powerful influence on George. And even though there was some strain in their relationship, who of us can possibly relate to that? George leaned on her from the age of 11 when his father passed away to throughout his entire life. And she's credited with building in George the character and the integrity and the ethics that made him the phenomenal commander of the Continental Army that he was. And so, as strong-willed as she was, it was a positive thing for the American Republic that she instilled that in George. So how can we possibly talk about women of the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, if we don't talk about Martha Washington, who was, for all intents and purposes, oftentimes probably seen as George's right-hand man. She's credited with starting a sewing circle. And I know this sounds very blasé and passé in our time and place, but her and several others, wives of commanding officers and others, would travel around and sew and repair the uniforms of the soldiers fighting the war. And that's a powerful statement when you think about that kind of influence. And it says how to heart the women of that era took the fight against Great Britain and the tyranny of King George. And I think that's something that we should really be looking at today. When we see homes today, there are oftentimes split homes that show that the husband would be on one side and the wife be on the other, and that often causes strife. But in the case of Martha Washington and George Washington, she traveled and spent the winter with him in his winter quarters, because back then there was very little fighting in the winter. It was just not pragmatic or practical. And she would spend the entire winter with him. And not only that, she also became a nurse and a selfless comforter and to soldiers. And one person who witnessed Martha's activities during the war said, "I never in my life knew a woman so busy from early morning until late at night as was Lady Washington, providing comforts for the sick soldiers." Look, this was not a hands-off war like we see today, where it's something that happens way over there. And the only time you're really impacted is if it's a loved one that's there and then they get hurt, or they get sadly they're killed in the line of action. And this was real for them. This was fought in their backyards. This was fought on their property. This was fought from street to street and hill to hill. And these women, like Martha Washington, traveled and fought alongside these men in one way or another. And in the case of one woman, she literally was out fighting. There was Lucy Flucker Knox. She was known as Lady Knox. She was considered at times aloof, but kind and generous. And here's what they say about her: never hesitating to share her and Henry's food with starving men and giving aid to the sick and injured. Here's a powerful statement too. Lucy gave up her entire loyalist family, never to see them again, to marry the man she had loved since she was just 14 years old. So think about that. At 14, she fell in love with Henry Knox. And she lost her entire family for the cause. How many of you can say that? How many of you can say that you have put yourself out there in this situation that we're in right now in the United States, and here, especially here in the people's state of Marxisota, where you're willing to take such a firm stand on something that it might mean the severance of a relationship like Lucy did? Because honestly, my friends, my viewers, my all 10 and 10 of you, it could be coming to that. And for some of us, it has come already. There's Abigail Adams. Now, Abigail Adams is probably one of the more well-known wives of the American War for Independence, because history and very wise people have been able to preserve letters that she and John wrote to each other. John was often seen as grumpy, and it's hard to imagine what he would have been without the temperance of his wife. Abigail, and this is a strange one for me. Abigail was actually appointed by a governor, the governor of Massachusetts at the time, to question women who were considered as giving aid and comfort and supporting the British cause, the Tories, in the continental United States, in the colonies. I think that's, not necessarily something that's in and of itself is, it's noteworthy, but I think we need to be very careful, especially in today's cancel culture, with looking at that and going, oh yeah, we need more of that. But it says a lot about her character, and it says a lot about her ethic, at the time. And it says a lot about her intelligence and her wisdom and her intellect too. Um, here's an interesting take on her. As the Second Continental Congress was formed and debated the Declaration of Independence, Abigail began the argument in her letters to her husband that creation of a new form of government was a chance to make the legal status of women equal to that of men. Look, all of you neo-feminists and all you third wave feminists and all of you who think you're liberated women, here was a woman who was completely dedicated to helping her husband. Like, this woman was dedicated to her husband. She was dedicated to her home. She did not have what many of you would consider to be a career. And she recognized that in the inception of the American Republic, it was a chance for women to see some equality, quite frankly, biblical equality, not the egalitarianism that we see in most left-leaning churches today, but actual biblical equality. And she was really kind of the epitome of what we see in Proverbs 31 as that what we refer to as a Proverbs 31 wife. Here's some stuff that she did, right? Remember, her husband was a grumpy man, and he was fully invested in the war effort. And here's what is said about her. Abigail remained in Braintree, managing the farm and household and raising their children. How many people are willing to give up their careers today to do that? Although women at the time did not normally handle business affairs, Abigail traded livestock, hired help, bought land, oversaw construction, and supervised the planting and harvesting, allowing her husband to become the statesman and leading advocate of American independence. Here's what she wrote. I hope in time to have the reputation of being as good a farmess as my partner has of being a good statesman. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a woman who loved her husband. She hung her reputation on the statesmanship of her husband and said, I want to be that good. Now, oftentimes what we see is women vying to be better than their husbands, very rarely supporting them in many situations. Quick to drag them down, quick to belittle them. I mean, look at TV these days. You know, does art reflect culture? Does culture reflect art? I don't know. But you wouldn't see a woman on a drama or a sitcom today say such a thing about her husband. And very rarely will you hear that reflected in the general conversation of women about their husbands as well today. I'm sorry. You don't like it. I don't care. It's true. It is now okay to rip apart your husband and treat him like he's a child and talk about how stupid he is and how he couldn't handle living without you and how he couldn't manage the kids if you weren't there. Here's a woman named Mercy Otis Warren. Here's something that she said on December 29th of 1774. America stands armed with resolution and virtue, but she still recoils at the idea of drawing the sword against the nation from whence she derived her origin. That's a conflict internally. That's an internal conflict. Like, we're resolved, but we don't want to do this. And that, ladies and gentlemen, should be our message today. We're resolved to stand. We don't want to have to do this, but if we must, we will, right? Okay, that is not a call to action of violence. I'm just saying, I don't want to put myself out there. I'm like, look, the stuff that I do, I don't want to have to be saying the things that I'm saying about public servants, these public figures who are making mincemeat of the Constitution and our constitutional liberties. It's not comfortable for me. I don't want to have to stand up and call out public servants. And quite frankly, it's already shown that it's put me under the spotlight. And it's causing me no small amount of consternation in my life. But what's Mercy say? America stands armed with resolution and virtue, but she still recoils at the idea of drawing the sword against the nation from whence she derived her origin. She was known as the conscience of the American Revolution. She accomplished things unknown to women in her lifetime, and I'm so sick of hearing about all these accomplished feminists, the feminazis out there today. This woman was a woman's woman. She was a lady of ladies, and she was a prolific and influential writer, and the first woman playwright. She was a woman who spoke her opinions by writing them down. Her writings contained her beliefs, thoughts, opinions about wars and political issues, and she sympathized with the call for the revolution, composing political poetry. There are many women who definitely had a significant role in the formation of this country during the revolution when formal politics did not include women. Early on, Mercy Otis Warren, while recognizing social differences between men and women, also knew that the minds of both genders could be equally valuable. To this end, she realized that women needed education as much as men and pushed for schools to be established for women and girls. Although not a feminist in contemporary terms, she was unique in her time, writing and working for equal respect and equal rights for women, regardless of station in life. That is a truly feminine woman. How about Catherine Moore Barry? Known as the heroine of the Battle of Cowpens, Kate Barry volunteered as a scout for the American forces. Familiar with every trail and shortcut around her plantation in South Carolina, I know I said plantation, I'm probably going to get banned for that. And being an excellent horsewoman, Kate was crucial in warning the militia of the approaching British. The Battle of Cowpens took place in January 17, 1781. Before the battle, Kate was instrumental in rounding up militia, including her husband, Captain Andrew Barry, to support General Daniel Morgan and his troops. Thanks to the bravery of women like Catherine Barry, the Battle of Cowpens was a decisive victory by Continental Army forces in the Southern campaign of the American Revolutionary War. Sybil Ludington. Sybil has been celebrated as a female Paul Revere because of her ride through Putnam and Dutchess counties to warn the militia that British troops were burning down Danbury, Connecticut. Danbury is very important in the history of constitutional thought and philosophy, if you will, because Danbury is where the battle between the Danbury Baptists took place, not in the physical sense, but in between the Danbury Baptists and an established religion. And it's where the words that Thomas Jefferson penned that said there shall be a wall of separation between the state and the church were actually penned, never in the Constitution. And now keep in mind, Jefferson is the author of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, credited that way. And he never intended for that phrase to be used the way that it's used today, especially since it never shows up in the Constitution anywhere. In addition, Sybil's father, Colonel Henry Ludington, was a commander in the 7th Regiment of the Dutchess County Militia. After arriving in Connecticut on April 25, 1777, British General Tryon and his forces set about selectively burning down homes and stores in Danbury. While destroying the properties, the British discovered several hundred cases of wine and rum. After consuming more rum than they ought to, and lacking military discipline, the drunken soldiers cruelly set about igniting more fires. A messenger was dispatched to Colonel Ludington with the news of the attacks, reaching the Ludington home, exhausted and unfamiliar with the area. It isn't clear whether she was asked or volunteered, but Sybil set out on what has become her famous ride to alert the militia. 16-year-old Sybil traveled 40 miles from her home, steering clear of the British soldiers and loyalists before returning home the next day. 16. You couldn't get a 16-year-old girl to walk to the freaking library today. It would be too hard. I'm gonna sweat. What if it rains? Somebody might whistle at me. Sybil, at the age of 16, rode 40 miles warning people that the British were coming. She could have been killed. How about Nancy Hart? Here's a woman known to have a hot temper, fearless spirit, and no hesitation to deliver revenge if she felt herself or any member of her family had been harmed. The most well-known account of Nancy's life begins when 6 British soldiers stopped at her cabin in search of a Whig. Whigs were the revolutionary types, the rebels, demanding information if he had stopped at the farm. Although the man they were tracking had been there, she denied seeing anyone. Convinced that she was lying, one of the Tories shot and killed Hart's prized gobbler, ordering her to cook the bird. Entering the cabin, they stacked their weapons in a corner and demanded something to drink. Hart obliged them by serving up wine. As the soldiers drank the wine, Hart sent her daughter to the spring for a bucket of water. She secretly instructed her daughter to blow a conch shell kept in a nearby stump to alert the neighbors that Tories were in the cabin. I'm sorry. I'm just the vast majority of people today, men and women. Yes, I'm using binary language. Men and women wouldn't have the guts to do this. As Hart served her unwelcome visitors and passed between them and their weapons, she began to pass the muskets through an opening in the cabin wall to her daughter, who had slipped outside to the rear of the house. When the soldiers noticed what was going on, they rushed to try and retrieve what weapons were left. She gave them one warning that she would shoot the next man that moved. Ignoring her warning, one man made the deadly mistake of approaching her. She held the rest off until her husband, Benjamin, and others arrive. It was in 1912 that workmen grading a railroad near the site of the old Hart cabin unearthed a neat row of 6 skeletons that lay under the nearly 3 feet of earth that were estimated to have been buried for at least a century. More than likely, these were the men that were executed for attacking the Hart cabin. There's Esther DeBert Reed. Esther was born in London, met American Joseph Reed, and they were married on May 31st, 1770, eventually moving to Philadelphia. As the revolution progressed, Esther became disenchanted with her homeland and began to support the American cause. To show her patriotism, Esther established the Ladies of Philadelphia. The organization raised an enormous sum of $300,000 for the troops by going door to door and asking for donations. Esther suggested to General Washington that the money be divided up and given to the soldiers. Although Washington was more than appreciative for the gift, he felt it would do more good if it was used for clothing. The women of the Ladies of Philadelphia bought linen, sewing shirts for the American troops. We can't hardly get most Americans, especially young American women, to bat an eye in the direction of a man in uniform today. Questions about the legality of wars and whatnot now aside, these women spent their time raising money and making clothing and uniforms for the soldiers of the American War for Independence. Where are you today? And then there's Margaret Cochran Corbin, was one of the wives who during the Revolution were tagged as camp followers. These women followed their husbands, cooking, washing laundry, and doing whatever domestic chores needed to be done. On November 16th, 1776, while they were stationed in Fort Washington, the fort was attacked by British and Hessian troops. The Hessians were German mercenaries. Margaret's husband John was assisting a gunner who was ultimately killed during the battle. John then took over as gunner until he was killed. Margaret, known as Captain Molly, had no time to mourn. And continued firing the cannon alone until she was wounded, severely injuring her shoulder and chest and mangling her jaw. She never fully recovered from the wounds. And was left without the use of her left arm for the rest of her life. And today, we would get, I can't do that. I might break a nail. And so I know I've been a little derisive about our modern culture. It's because we're soft. And the three women that I dedicated this video to, they're not soft. They're each brave and hard in their own right, willing to do hard things and say hard things and do hard things. But the vast majority of our culture today, men and women alike, would never hold a candle to these 10 women. All of them mothers and wives. Who didn't think of themselves as superior to everyone around them, but gave up of themselves, made great sacrifices for the cause of liberty to launch a republic upon a continent that would forever change the face of the world for the better, for all of our faults. The Republic of the United States has had a positive impact on the entire world. We have staved off totalitarianism. We have staved off authoritarianism. We have staved off Marxist authoritarianism. We have staved off fascist authoritarianism. And it started during the War for Independence, and to no small part, and not a small amount of credit, but a large amount of credit should go to the women, hundreds of them, like the ones that I have talked about here today. Don't know who's watching this. If you're inspired by what you heard of these women, do something, say something, speak out against unconstitutional injustices that are happening in your community, in your town, from Albert Lee to Rochester to Michigan to Kentucky to Georgia to New Mexico to Idaho to Portland, Oregon to California, wherever it might be. If you're inspired by what these women said and did, then do something. Be like them. Don't model yourself after today's modern feminist women. Model yourself after these women, ladies, godly women. Read and understand Proverbs 31. Model yourself after that woman, like many of these women would have understood. Instead of being all about trying to be better than everyone around you, think about how you can serve others around you, because that will make you a better person. Strive to be a lady. Set aside modern feminism and strive for femininity. Don't try to be like the guys. Don't try to have everything the guys have, and don't try and compete with them in the way that we see it today. A truly decent and honorable man will love a feminine woman, and he will appreciate the influence and the counsel and the care of a woman who is respectful and kind. and dedicated, who's willing to follow him and support him in his cause. And that's what I have been thankful for the most on this Mother's Day. Go thank your mothers, your wives, and raise your children well. Until next time.